25 Racing and Farm Motorsports and NASCAR have the appeal court in regards to the preliminary injunction, and there's a lot of rumors continuing to circle about GMS Racing returning the Craftsman Truck Series with Dodge joining up in 2026 as well. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got to NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into really quickly. We're going to start by talking about Kyle Busch, as it was confirmed by NASCAR a couple days ago that Kyle Busch will be sponsored by Cenex this weekend during the Cup Series race at the All-Star event at North Wilkesboro. This will be the first time that Cenex has sponsored Kyle Busch in 2025. It's unknown how many races they are going to sponsor Kyle Busch this year, but it's pretty awesome to see that Cenex is back and working with Kyle Busch in the 2025 year. I do got to say the car actually looks really solid. It does look really, really good, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing on the racetrack, and it's awesome. Maybe you'll see Kyle Busch have some luck and run really, really well this weekend at North Wilkesboro. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As Kyle Larson has reached 10,000 laps led in NASCAR Cup Series competition. He is only the third active driver who has reached this total. Kyle Busch has led 19,941 laps, and Denny Hamlin's the other one who's led over 15,000 laps. He is also only the 22nd driver in NASCAR Cup Series history to reach that total, and he's very close to surpassing not only Kurt Busch, but I believe also Dale Jarrett on that number as well. Kyle Larson has continued to dominate the sport over the course of the last couple of years, especially since getting to Hendrick Motorsports. There was a very big possibility he was going to do that. He dominated the Cup Series race, leading 221 of the 267 laps, and there's a very realistic possibility by the time we get past the Coke 600, he could already have 1,000 laps led. He has led 817 laps so far in the 2025 year. It's honestly been incredible how dominant he's been. Congratulations, Larson, on breaking this number. I think that's a massive and really big accomplishment for him, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about cautions in NASCAR. As it was reported by Daniel Cespedes on Friday afternoon that the number of cautions and the length of the cautions has, according to him, been increasing in recent years. In 2024-2025, we have seen a pretty big increase in the cautions. According to him, for the Cup Series, we've gone up in the last years from about 4 or 5 laps under yellow to sometimes even during the stage cautions going up to around 9 or 10 laps under caution between each stage. And it seems like the races might be taking a lot longer because of that. I think one of the big issues that I've said for a while is if you want to make these races shorter, because we were talking about the lengths of these races and maybe making these races shorter, I do feel like you do have to shorten up the lengths of the cautions. I think some of these stage cautions and even the regular cautions are a little bit over ridiculous in my opinion. And I think if we can find a way to shorten that up, I think make the sport definitely a little bit better. Because I think right now at this moment, the cautions are way too long sometimes, and for a single car spin, we shouldn't be running under caution 10 laps. I think there's a way to shorten that up, and I think that would help a lot with getting things a lot quicker done, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we had the IndyCar race from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on the Indianapolis road course. And for most of this event, Graham Rahal would dominate. He would get the lead on lap number 2 of the race, or lap number 1, I should say, and would dominate the early portion of the event. But if he was going to have a chance and opportunity to win, he was going to have to be picture perfect. And unfortunately, as the run went on, Alex Palou, who had been right behind him, made a run with about 30 laps to go in the race and would take the lead from Graham Rahal. They came down pit road for the final pit stops, and of course, they had terrible pit stop for Graham Rahal, and Alex Palou had a near 6 or 7 second lead at that point. But for the first time since lap number 1 of St. Pete, we actually had a caution for Dave Malukas, so it bunched everybody up. And we all thought, okay, there might be a chance for Paddle Ward or someone else to beat him. They couldn't beat Alex Palou, though, and Alex Palou would come off the corner for a near 5.5 second lead and would come off the corner and pick up his 4th win in the first 5 races of the season. He is the first driver to have a 1.25 average for the first 5 races of the year since A.J. Foyt in 1964. This is unprecedented. We have not seen domination like this in IndyCar, at least in my lifetime. And he has a really good chance this year to win the Indianapolis 500. And the fact that he continues to dominate at the rate that he's dominating is exceptional and impressive. I get people don't like when someone dominates at this level, but I think it's a big deal to see that Alex Palou continues to win races and gets it done on a week-by-week basis. It's absolutely impressive. It's a well-deserved win. Huge congratulations to him on picking up a well-earned win. It was a great win for Palou. He earned it. I know the racing product IndyCars have been fantastic, but I think nonetheless it's really awesome to see him get it done. Congratulations once again to Alex Palou on picking up the win. It is a well-deserved and well-earned win from him. Good to him to get it done, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Elton Sawyer. Now, before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at Kansas Speedway, in the driver meeting that took place, Elton Sawyer basically told the drivers in the driver meeting that he says his mom apparently had called him out before the race happened, where his mom basically told him on Mother's Day, basically said that don't basically be the story of the event. When you have your mom telling you that you're basically don't become the story of the race, you know you've got a problem. There have been a lot of issues with officiating in NASCAR, especially over the last couple of years, and I think that there needs to be a lot that needs to be addressed here on this. There's been a lot of problems at officiating. We've discussed it a lot on this channel in recent years, and I do think that Elton Sawyer, while he's just a spokesperson, he also does help make a lot of decisions in regards to this. So I do think they've got to clean it up desperately when it comes to officiating, because otherwise it's going to continue to get more and more sloppy as time progresses and goes on. At least this time we didn't have any officiating blunders or major issues this time around. I know Kyle Busch was pissed off about some of the issues on track, but I do think that for Elton Sawyer, he just needs to clean it up on the officiating side of things because they've had issues with it. I hope it does happen going forward where we can get a lot of this officiating issue solved and get a lot of this discourse headed in a much better direction going forward, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dawson Sutton. Now, if you watch a NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Kansas Speedway, you saw what happened early in the event. So Dawson Sutton, who had got caught up in one of the early incidents of the race on lap 1 when Jake Garcia didn't really get a good start and Ty Majeski, Carson Osbar had contact, Dawson Sutton also got collected in that as well. And Dawson Sutton had a flat tire as it came down the front straightaway and was spin out coming down pit road. Now, a lot of people thought maybe, and some thought maybe he was intentionally trying to bring a caution now because NASCAR would go ahead and throw the caution. And because of this, NASCAR would go ahead and give Dawson Sutton a 2-lap penalty for that and would sit on pit road for 2 laps. Dawson Sutton was not really happy about that call, and I understand from Dawson Sutton's position. Now, if you want to hear my personal opinion on this, I don't think that Dawson Sutton intentionally brought out the caution. I get that NASCAR has been really consistent about these things, but I don't think it was as blatant as when like Carson Osbar spun coming to pit road a few years ago at Talladega and Las Vegas. I don't think this was intentional. I think NASCAR might have jumped the gun a little bit here. And plus, it took NASCAR a very long time to throw the caution anyways. He was literally about to get the truck back going and get it back down pit road. It was, my opinion, I think NASCAR definitely jumped the gun. Dawson did get a decent finish at the end of the day, but at the same token, at the same time, I just think that NASCAR needs to sometimes be a little more patient and let the guys get their trucks and cars refired and then not be really quickly or trigger happy on the button, because I personally think that they jumped the gun on this one, and I think it was a little bit too close to go ahead and throw it. I understand why they were a little bit questioning it, because I know there's been a lot of drivers who intentionally brought cautions out in the past, but in the same token and the same time, I personally don't think this was intentional. I don't think it was as bad as what they were claiming. And personally, I don't think that they did it intentionally, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Osbar. Now, we've got a lot of Carson Osbar stories to talk about today on the channel. The first one revolves around development in NASCAR. Now, he was being interviewed by, I believe, Daniel McFadden, a couple of people from the Front Stretch group over there, and Carson Osbar was asked about development and when he got up from the Truck Series to Cup, what he expects the pipeline to be going forward. Well, Carson Osbar says that he believes that the Xfinity Series will still be the main pipeline for development, and he doesn't think that drivers can jump straight up from the Craftsman Truck Series all the way to the Cup Series. He thinks that the main development pipeline is still long-term going to be in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He doesn't think it's much in trucks. He thinks that unless you're extremely talented like Hocevar is or like a Corey Heim is, for example, you're not going to be able to be as good. I do kind of disagree slightly with Carson Osbar. I think it is a little bit of a preference in all honesty, because one of the reasons why we said that the Truck Series has been a much better development pipeline than the Xfinity Series is, well, one, they're not as crazy and chaotic nowadays, but number two, it's because the truck feels very similar to the current NASCAR Cup car. The Xfinity Series platform is a lot different than the Cup platform currently at this moment, and many drivers who have come down the Truck Series have felt like that the truck feels very similar to the Cup Series car. That's when we talk about a development pipeline. A lot of people really compare it with that. I think that Carson does bring up some good points. I don't think there's any denying in question on that, but I do think that Carson is a little bit wrong on that. I think it's a preference thing personally. I think if you're good in one thing, you might not be as good in another series. So I think while I do understand and I kind of get where he's coming from, At the same token, same time, I do disagree because we're seeing more drivers come from trucks and have a lot of success. Some guys are going up to Xfinity like a Christian Eckes and have struggled, even though I think that's more of a calling thing than anything else at this particular point. But I think it's all a preferential thing at this point, and it's kind of a little bit of misperception in some ways, but at the same token, same time, I do get where he's coming from, but I also don't fully think that he's entirely speaking facts in that situation. But that's my opinion. I don't think he's entirely fully accurate, but I think he's also accurate in some ways also, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Antonio Brown. There's been a lot of talk about Antonio Brown on social media that many of you have probably seen. And Antonio Brown, it seems like, is open to racing in NASCAR. Now, this comes from the Daily Downforce, which is a parody account based around the Daily Downforce. And they were basically putting out a thing saying that we think that Antonio Brown is going to make a start in NASCAR. Well, Antonio Brown saw this, and apparently it seems like he actually might be interested in making a start in NASCAR or ARCA. Now, Antonio Brown obviously has not been involved in the NFL in many years, but he's been doing some stuff with NASCAR. He, of course, has some very close ties with Mark Martin currently at the moment. So if Antonio Brown was able to find his way into NASCAR, I think he would struggle. Now, obviously, this feels very similar when Jake Paul said he wanted to be a NASCAR driver a few years ago, which I completely questioned that because Jake Paul was a fighter at the time and a YouTuber a few years ago. He was, of course, getting his way into basically being a boxer. But I don't see there in a way where Antonio Brown would be really good. I think he would struggle out on the racetrack. It would definitely be a very, very funny watch. I would give you that. But I also think it wouldn't be the best for the product out there. I just think that there's definitely better ways for Antonio. I think doing testing is one of the most important things if he's going to take this seriously, because it's not just driving left and going in circles. There's a lot of techniques around it, and I think Antonio Brown is going to learn that very quickly if he's really serious about this. He's going to learn very quickly on what it takes to be good at this sport and not be good. There's a lot of techniques toward it. You can't just be good at turning left. There's a lot of certain things that you're going to have to do to be good in this type of stuff. So to me, I think he's going to really struggle. I don't think he's going to do a really good job. And personally, I think he ends up not running very well and crashing quite a bit. This might be very similar to a Tia Norfleet situation where he may only make a few laps and do bad. He'll have to get some racing experience out there and do some stuff at certain tracks to try to get good. I don't think he'll be good in all honesty. He might prove me wrong and actually be good, but I personally don't think he'll do a really good job behind the wheel. He probably would struggle and not race very, very well, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Fox. As there was a report by Austin Kanensky that with the NASCAR Cup Series race concluding at Kansas Speedway, this was the last points-paying Cup Series broadcast of 2025 for the Fox broadcast. Now remember, they will be broadcasting the All-Star race, and qualifying and practice will be televised on the Fox family of networks as well. So this means that this upcoming week will be the final time we will be seeing Fox, at least on the Cup side. Of course, the Truck Series will be on Fox throughout the whole entire year and season as well. I'm honestly really glad that Fox is leaving. Now, I will say the broadcasts from time to time have shown slight improvement since Artie Kepner's been gone, but they also have had a lot of issues this year. When you look at the broadcast and all the broadcasting partners out there, we know NBC, they're way better with their broadcasts. The CW, the Xfinity Series broadcasts have generally been really good, even though they've had a lot of remote broadcasts this year, and I do have a major issue with that. Their broadcasts have generally been a lot better. Fox's broadcasts have just not been that good this year, and unfortunately, they've become more and more of glaring issues since they have less races this year. They don't even have a post-race show as much. They do an hour-and-a-half long pre-race show and do like a 20-30 minute post-race show at the longest. I don't understand why you need an hour and a half of pre-race and no post-race. Post-race should take more of a priority than the pre-race show. I just don't get that, and I've never understood that from Fox and any network that does that. I'm just glad that Fox is going to be gone here in the next couple weeks, and I'm excited for Prime to take over. We've got Dale Jr., we've got Steve Letarte, we've got Adam Alexander, you've got Carl Levers joining up, you of course got Corey LaJoie going to be there, Daniel Trotta, and you're going to have some really nice pit reporters like Kim Kuhn, and also going to have Marty Snyder and other people down there as well. But I'm very intrigued to see what Amazon is going to bring to the table, because I'm definitely excited about that. But I also do think overall that I think it's good that Fox is going to be gone, because I think the broadcast will hopefully be better when we do get to the side of doing the Amazon TNT. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, they're not good, but I don't think it will be bad. I think their broadcast actually will generally be really positive and really, really good, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Osbar and Ryan Preece. So, if you watched a NASCAR Cup Series race the past week at Texas Motor Speedway, you saw the incident between Carson Osbar and Ryan Preece. So both drivers had got trapped a lap down after Jesse Love had spun out during green flag pit stops. And they're both restarting in the back of the field. They're both very angry and were driving angry and were very, very frustrated because of what had happened there. They come off of turn number 2 with around 40 to 50 laps to go in the race, and they both end up crashing. Carson Osbar completely misses the corner going off of turn number 2 and puts Ryan Preece in the outside wall. They both end up crashing. Ryan Preece's day would come to an end, and he was very unhappy about what had happened. He basically says that he and Ryan Preece basically called him out basically during when he was getting interviewed and basically called Carson out. Now, Carson earlier this week and before the race had happened, he spoke to the media about what had happened, and he says that he and Ryan Preece spoke about the incident. Carson also admitted that he was at fault for the wreck, and he takes full responsibility for the incident, and he says he does have to clean it up going forward and be a lot better out on the racetrack. Now, Ryan Preece also did respond to Carson Hocevar's comments, speaking about Pockers, and he says that Carson Hocevar is the only driver that can make decisions. He says that Carson can say all he wants to say to the media, but his actions speak louder than words. And I actually do agree with Ryan Preece on that front. Look, Carson Osbar, from time to time, I think the guy is extremely talented, but I do think from time to time, Carson gets stepped way over the edge and can cause some big incidents and big crashes that do affect the outcomes for these drivers. And I think that Carson does have a little bit of not the best reputation out there, but he is a young enough driver. We got to remember this, Carson Osbar is only 22 years old currently at the moment. He is still a driver that's learning a lot. And I think as he gets more experience in these Cup cars, he's going to learn to be better. I know we saw some stuff in the truck race that we're going to talk about here in just a short little bit. But to me, I think there's definitely things he can clean up for. There's no denying that. There's no questioning that. But I also think that Carson and Preece, they've had a little bit of history. Go back to 2023 at Charlotte. So it's not the first time they've had issues and incidents against each other. To me, though, I do believe that we could definitely see things be a little bit better, and I think that these two could do a better job not getting the incidents with each other, but I also think that maybe down the road we'll see things clean up between these two guys. It seems like at least for now things are fine. I think the big thing for Carson, just clean up some of the on-track antics, don't make those mistakes, and don't cause incidents out on the track, because you've got a lot of people who don't like you for some of the stuff you've done, Carson. Just clean it up and stop causing incidents to some of these drivers, because otherwise you're going to have drivers that are going to hate you long-term going forward. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch once again. Now, basically during a Q&A that Brett kind of posted on his Twitter page, apparently someone had asked Kyle Busch about whether he will put Kyle will put Brexton Busch in ARCA. And Kyle Busch pretty much responded by saying that he will not be letting Brexton Busch come into ARCA. And the reason he said that is because he feels like ARCA currently at the moment is a waste of time and it's not a good way to develop a driver. That is certainly interesting, but honestly, is Kyle Busch wrong? Look, I do think ARCA from time to time does have a really good product. And I think many years ago, it was a really good way to develop a driver. The problem is currently at the moment, ARCA, one, I think the racing product isn't always the most exciting. But number two, you really only have two competitive cars in that series. You've got the 28 car for Pinnacle Racing Group, and you have the 18 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. And then on the Super Speedways, Adventure Rating cars are on a different level. But generally right now, the ARCA series does not have a lot of development going on at the moment. And a lot of these guys are just jumping straight up to trucks and going to Xfinity as well, or going to the Cars Tour for that matter. I think a series that honestly is a lot better for development is the Cars Tour. You'll learn a lot more about racing, and sometimes you get the opportunity and chance to race in the Cars Tour. Now, if Brexton is going to run a Daytona when he turns 18, he is going to have to run the ARCA race at Daytona, so he'll have to run that no matter what. But I do think that it's kind of funny seeing Kyle Busch call out the ARCA series, because again, ARCA has a lot of glaring issues and a lot of glaring faults currently at the moment that I do think that desperately need to be addressed. Will they be addressed? I honestly don't know. I think there needs to be more money going into this series so we can have more competitive teams and you can have more competitive drivers. But I think there's also better ways for some of these things to be said as well. But I also do think that Kyle Busch is not wrong again. So I think that ARCA does have its own issues and problems. If they get more money in the series, I think the series could be put into a better light. But right now, I think with the lack of money and lack of funds it's got for a lot of these teams, you're seeing a lot more of these paid drivers come in, and I think that's affecting the racing product in a pretty big way, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Heim. Now, we do have a couple Corey Heim stories to talk about today on the channel. The first of all is around a comment that was brought up during the Truck Series broadcast at Kansas Speedway. So Corey Heim and Carson Osbar, of course, have been two of the drivers that were big in this race. Carson Osbar, of course, ended up picking up the Truck Series win, while at the time Corey Heim was leading the race. And Amanda Busick had apparently interviewed Corey Heim before the Truck Series race began, and apparently Corey Heim is still not a big fan of Carson Osbar, and in fact, he actually says he hates Carson Osbar, and he says that I'm still mad that Carson cost me the championship in 2023, and apparently Corey says that Carson Osbar never apologized to him for what had happened on the racetrack. So let's go back to a couple years ago. Basically, in 2023, the two strongest trucks all season have been Carson Osbar in the 42 truck, who got 4 wins that year, and Carson Osbar, I believe, had 4 or 5 wins up to that point. They were the two favorites going into the race, and Corey Heim looked like was easy going to win the championship, but Carson Osbar would stay out on older tires, and Carson would get passed by Corey Heim. Well, Carson, in his infinite wisdom, decided to run into the back of Corey Heim and dump him going into the corner, collecting Stewart-Friesen as well. Now, Corey Heim obviously was not very happy, was really angry about the incident, and he would get his revenge and payback with 3 laps to go and put Carson into the outside wall. This would cost Grant Enfinger the championship, and the win would go to, I believe the winner of the race was Chandler Smith or someone like that, or Christian Eckes, I should say, and Ben Rhodes won the title. I think in this case and situation, I get it's been a few years, but I also understand why Corey Heim is so upset about that, because Corey Heim feels like he got robbed of that championship. He probably should have won the championship that year, in all honesty. No disrespect to Ben Rhodes, but Ben Rhodes was not the fastest truck on the racetrack, and Corey Heim was the fastest truck for most of the season. So I do think that for Corey Heim, being upset about that is completely understandable. I'm a little surprised he hasn't fully moved on from that, but at the same time, I'm also not entirely shocked about that. I do think, though, that we can see these two down there. I don't know if they're ever going to make up and clean up talking about this, because, again, it's been a few years. But I also understand Corey Heim's frustration on Carson, because I personally do think that Carson hasn't always learned from his mistakes, and I think sometimes he's way over aggressive, which has cost him. And the fact he's not apologized for that incident, I think, is a little bit shocking, and I do think it's a little bit surprising, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Osbar and Lane Riggs. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Kansas Speedway, you saw an all-time classic finish between Carson Osbar and Lane Riggs. So Carson Osbar had been dominating the end of this event, but unfortunately his truck on the long run, especially from earlier in the race, he was really, really struggling. Meanwhile, Lane Riggs, who had gotten caught in a bad position after Frankie Muniz had spun out during green flag pit stops, he unfortunately lost a ton of ground and was charging his way up to the front, gaining 2 to even 0.3 of a second a lap, and was running him down very, very quickly. Well, Lane Riggs got to Carson on the white flag of the event and caught him very, very quickly. And going into turn number 1, there would be contact between both. Lane Riggs would go up the racetrack and put Carson Osbar in the outside wall, and they both would get sideways, but both were able to continue on. Meanwhile, William Byron was charging his way up to the front and was closing his way in a very quick hurry. And I thought that William Byron was going to come in and seal the win. Luckily, those two would finish 1-2. Technically, at the time, Carson would come off the corner and pick up the win. And as he came across the line, he gave the middle finger to Lane Riggs. Lane Riggs really did not understand why Carson was flipping him off. I actually thought, honestly, it was a funny thing. I guess some people were upset about that, but I personally didn't have a major issue with Carson flipping off Lane Riggs. We need personality in the sport. And say what you want to say about Carson, he does bring a lot of personality to the sport, so I thought that was funny. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't really matter for Lane, because while Lane did technically finish second originally, he got disqualified from the Truck Series race because of the bed cover, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I thought that finish was so good. It felt very similar to the finish between Johnny Sauter and Ron Hornaday 15 years ago at that track. That was a really awesome finish. The Truck Series put on some good racing for sure. And I do think that it was a great finish between two of the best drivers who do race in that series. So I really enjoyed it. It was a great event. I thought it was a fun race, better than the Cup Series race in all honesty. And it was a really great race. A very enjoyable event. Congrats to Carson on picking up the win. A well-earned win. Had the strongest truck in the second half of that race. And again, it was a really fun and very interesting and really great event for the series. Really awesome racing, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about a rotating championship. Now, We all know it was announced earlier this week that they will be starting to do a rotating championship starting in 2026. And Homestead Miami Speedway is going to be part of that, as it will be the first race part of that new rotating championship starting next year. And of course, in 2027, there'll be a new track part of that. Now, some drivers were asked about what races could be part of a said rotating championship. Well, Ryan Blaney spoke a lot about this. He says he's glad that Ben Kennedy basically confirmed they're not going to be doing super speedways. But some tracks he mentioned were Las Vegas, Homestead, Kansas, and Phoenix. Now, Homestead and Phoenix, they're already given at this point. Phoenix will probably host a championship in 2028 or 2029 again. This will be the last year, at least for the next couple years. And Homestead, we know, is going to be for 2026. We have heard rumors that Las Vegas Motor Speedway could potentially host a championship race in 2027. There's been a lot of rumors and rumors about that potentially happening. So that could be a track that I think be good. It'd be a perfect city. And I think the racing generally in Vegas, while it's not amazing like Homestead or Kansas generally for that matter, I think Vegas is a good city for it. And I get you've got the potential of the Formula One race coming up. Kansas is a great track for it. The weather is a big issue that could affect that from potentially happening, but I do think Kansas would put on a great show as well. I think tracks like Charlotte could be considered. I'll throw Nashville in the mix. I think Nashville's kind of underrated here. I know Jarrett brought up in his video and Jordan Bianchi brought up in his article on tracks he'd like to see get part of the rotation, but I do think that Charlotte and Nashville should be considered as two potential candidates for that as well. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what tracks exactly do get part of that rotating championship in the near future, because I do truly believe that the rotating championship decision was one of the best decisions we have seen from NASCAR. I do hope we do get a big change to the playoff format. It's unknown what the playoff format exactly is going to look like for 2026. There's a lot of talk. There's some big changes coming. We may have more than one race for the championship run, which I think is the best way if we're going to still be doing a playoff format going forward. But to me, I think I'm very intrigued to see what that playoff format is going to look like. It's going to be interesting to see what we do see for the playoff format in 2026. But I love the rotating championship we're going to be starting to see next year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Phoenix Raceway. Now, Phoenix Raceway did confirm on their Twitter page that they are going to be hosting 2 races in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026. And they were a little bit cryptic on their tweet, but they say that they are going to be playing a major part in the run to the championship in 2026. Now, Ben Kennedy, I think, did confirm this on his Twitter page. If I'm not, you can correct me on this, but I believe he confirmed that Phoenix Raceway is expected to be part of the Round of 8 in 2026. Obviously, I'm not the biggest fan of Phoenix. I think we all kind of know this, but I do understand why Phoenix is part of that championship run and rotation, because I do think Phoenix does bring a lot. They do bring a lot of money to NASCAR, and the city is very supportive of Phoenix. Say what you want to say about the racing product at the track. The city supports the track in a really major way, and I do think that support is going to come a long way long term. But here's my issue I do have with Phoenix, right, getting 2 dates. I don't have as much issue because it's not the championship race, but I've said this for a while when it comes, if Phoenix does get the championship again, which could happen in the next couple of years, I don't believe that Phoenix should host 2 dates. And personally, the racing product just isn't that great. In fact, I think most tracks should only have 1 day. We've seen some issues with attendance this year at some tracks. Look at Kansas from earlier today. I love Kansas, man. One of my favorite tracks on the circuit. But they've been having some unfortunate attendance issues recently that have unfortunately been a major factor. So I do think we got to see some changes there. That being said, I will say Phoenix is going to bring a lot of money in. It's part of that championship run. It's part of that championship rotation. And I do think there's some good things that can come from something like a championship run and a championship rotation. It's going to be kind of interesting to see what happens in regards to a rotation and what races exactly are going to be part of that. But it seems like at this particular moment in point, Phoenix will be part of that rotation. It's interesting, but I do like it being there because of the city. But I also am not the biggest fan of the racing product at that track, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Heim. Now, Corey Heim, of course, made his first Cup Series start of 2025 and finished in a respectful 13th place. But a lot of people have been wondering, when will Corey Heim make more starts in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2025? Now, before the race even took place this weekend, he kind of confirmed what his upcoming schedule is going to be. According to Bob Pockers, his next Cup race that he spoke to the media about will be upcoming in about 3 or 4 weeks from now at National Super Speedway. Then after that, his next Cup race is going to be at the Chicago Street Course. We already had that confirmed as one of the races that Robinhood is going to sponsor as well. Of course, today at Kansas was one of the 2 races that Robinhood will sponsor this season. Corey Heim did a very solid job in his Cup Series start, in his first start of the 2025 year. He struggled a little bit early in the race and did cause an incident that unfortunately affected his teammate, Bubba Wallace. But to finish 13th and be the highest finishing 23 level racing car, that's honestly very, very impressive. And many people like myself have said that Corey Heim is ready to move up to the NASCAR Cup Series. And I think he should be a Cup Series driver full-time currently at this moment. The problem is Corey Heim doesn't have the funding and sponsorship on a full-time scale to go racing full-time. But I think Corey Heim's proven himself in the Craftsman Truck Series. I don't want to see the guy full-time in the Truck Series next year. He's way too good to be down there. He's been dominating the Truck Series. And he's only got 3 wins this year, but he probably should have 5 or 6 wins at this particular point. But I think Corey Heim also did have some mistakes, but that's something that he is going to learn. And I think over these next couple of weeks at Nashville, a track where he ran very well, was running around 10th to 11th majority of that race before he had his issues and got caught up in a lot of the chaos at the end of the event last year. I do think Corey Heim is going to be one of the favorites in the race. He's very, very strong at a track like Nashville, and he's really a good road course racer too, and he's going to be probably competing against guys like Shane Van Gisbergen for the win and Connor Zilchprass for the win in that race, but I do think that he is going to be a very major contender and a very strong factor to pick up the win in the not the win in Victory and Cup, but I think he'll be very strong as the 2011 racing cars have shown some solid speed this year, and I think he'll be very competitive. I'm excited to see what he can do. I really hope we see him in Cup next year full time. Obviously, with some of the stuff going on with Legacy Motor Club right now, there's a lot of talk. They're trying to get a charter at this particular moment. So hopefully they can get that charter for him. They can loan him out for a year. We don't even know what the situation with the charters are going to be for 2011 at this particular point. But I do think Heim deserves to be in the NASCAR Cup Series on a full-time basis, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As a report by VA Sleuth on Friday early morning, that Kyle Larson is currently working on a deal to run in the Supercar Series at Adelaide at the end of the year. Now, there's been a lot of talk about a wildcard driver coming out to the event. We had heard reports last year that Kyle Busch and Scott McLaughlin were among 2 of the drivers who they were looking at to try to drive this car at Adelaide, but unfortunately the deal fell through. They were going to drive for the AAA Engineering organization in that event, but with AAA Engineering moving away from Chevrolet to Ford, they're going to have to go to another organization for this to happen. So what team is looking to supply Kyle Larson in this run? Well, according to the account, it sounds like Premier, which is the new group that'll be managed by Roland Day, who of course is a big manager for Shane Van Gisbergen when he drove over for AAA Engineering with the Red Bull connection over there. He's the one managing the group. Now, Premier Air Racing, I don't know how good this team really is, to be honest, but it seems like they are the factory Chevrolet team. Now, Kyle Larson, many people do think that he would go out there and absolutely dominate and be a major factor in that event. And while I do think it's true that Larson would do a really good job, there's a lot of really good talent in that series. You've got Will Brown. You've got Brock Feeney. You've got other people like Dan Tickford or other people in that series. You've got a lot of really strong competition there. And some of the best drivers in the world, in my opinion, have come from supercars. So if Larson was able to go out there and win, then you probably could put him in the GOAT conversation, or at least in the conversation for best driver in the world. He, of course, is competing in the 500 this year, trying to win his first Indianapolis 500 and make the event like he did last year. But I think it's really exciting that Larson is looking to do this in racing supercars. I think we need to see more of this crossover. I think more drivers should do more stuff like doing crossover and other forms of racing. And I love the fact that Larson is going and doing this. I really think he'll be fast, and I do think he'll be strongly quick. And I think that the commitment toward this is something that he'll have to do, because he's going to be running, I think, a sprint car race out there. And if he does this, he'll miss the Turkey Night Grand Prix when the event happens. But I would rather take an opportunity to drive a supercar race and race in sprint cars, and I've won so many of those Turkey Night Grand Prix in the past. But I think Larson will have to make a decision on what he's going to do on that front. But I do think it's interesting he's looking to do a supercar race at this moment. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Pietro Fittipaldi. Now, Pietro Fittipaldi was on one of the podcasts with Front Stretch very recently, and he spoke about something very interesting in regards to Project 91. He says that he would love to run for Trackhouse Racing and the Project 91 car at some point in the future, or in 2025. Now, Pietro Fittipaldi, of course, last year ran full-time in IndyCar for Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. He has also been racing IMSA and LMP2 in recent years. Now, one thing about Pietro Fittipaldi, he also is a champion in stock cars. He actually won a track championship at Hickory around 2013 or 2014. That's actually where he got his racing start about a decade ago. Now, of course, he was a development driver for Haas. He actually was part of the Ferrari group and the Haas group over there and was a reserve driver and has made starts in Formula One as well. But he also, I believe, currently lives in North Carolina at this particular moment. I would love to see Pietro Fittipaldi get a chance and opportunity to race in NASCAR and see what he could do. I think Pietro Fittipaldi is honestly a better driver than people give him credit for. Is he a guy that's going out there and contending on anything on a week-by-week basis? No, of course not. But I do think that Pietro is someone that can drive very well and put up some really strong performances. So I hope this does happen where he gets the opportunity to drive for Project 91. Now, we've only seen Project 91 once this year so far, that of course being for Elio Castroneves. The 87 car is technically the Project 91 car that Connor Zilisch is running. That car will be running next week at the Coca-Cola 600 for Connor if he does get medically cleared to return, which I do think it sounds like he's probably going to be medically cleared to come back. But I noticed that car is for world-class drivers. And obviously, Elio Castroneves was a world-class driver. I really hope we get to see Pietro run in that car at some point. I know Pat O'Ward has expressed interest and wanted to try to run the Mexico race. I know it's not going to happen because of IndyCar happening at Gateway during that weekend, which will be happening pretty much around the same time. But maybe the Xfinity Series race could be an option. I don't know. But I do think Pietro coming in and racing in something like this would be really huge. I think a lot of people would love it, and I think it would be something that'd be really fun for the sport overall. So again, I hope it does happen where we get to see Pietro Fittipaldi race in NASCAR. He hasn't really made any starts in NASCAR outside of a couple Cup Series starts, I'm pretty sure, for Rick Ware, and I think he also made some Xfinity Series starts a couple years ago. But I want to see more of this crossover. I've talked about seeing people like Max Verstappen, maybe a Valentino Rossi, or even Daniel Ricciardo for that matter coming in. But I really hope we do get to see the chance and opportunity of someone like a Pietro Fittipaldi getting the opportunity here to race in the sport. We'll see if he does get that chance to sometime come down and race in something like this in the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the racing product in the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, there has been a lot of talk about the racing product in recent weeks in the NASCAR Cup Series and how the product has been good and also been bad as well. And a lot of people have been speaking about it in the NASCAR industry. One of those that spoke about it is Kyle Larson. Now, there wasn't the full context that was brought up by Jeff Gluck, but apparently Kyle Larson was extremely blunt about this. And Kyle Larson said, do you think that if the race at Kansas is good, do you think people will be happy about it? And he said yes, but also if the race isn't good, you're going to have people that are complaining no matter what. He says, oh, the car sucks. The racing product isn't good. It's not the best out there. It's not as good as it used to be. Kansas is a really, really bad racetrack. He said he hopes it was a really good race. Larson obviously was being a little sarcastic in a sense, but also was saying that the fans aren't always the best at things. And Larson isn't entirely wrong, regardless if a race is good or not. Fans are going to complain no matter what. Now, Ryan Blaney and Kyle Busch both spoke about it. Kyle Busch also criticized the next-gen car. He's going to be on the Actions Detrimental podcast, so probably criticize a next-gen car and the racing product there. Might talk about his exit from Joe Gibbs Racing as well. But Ryan Blaney also kind of talked about this as well, and Ryan Blaney said, just because someone dominates does not mean the racing product is good. He says, I don't get how people can be mad about someone dominating. I think that some people, no matter what, are going to complain about the racing product, right? If someone just flat out dominates an event, you're going to see a lot of people on social media that are not very happy. But right now, I just think the racing product in NASCAR is not that great on the Cup side. I think today's Cup Series race at Kansas was honestly one of the more entertaining races we've seen in recent weeks. But that's not the best Kansas race we've ever seen. There are major issues with the next-gen car at this particular moment in point. But if you show me a race like that at Kansas, and we got that kind of race every single week, I don't think the fans would be complaining as much. I just think the racing product generally at the moment in the NASCAR Cup Series with the next-gen car just isn't that great. We know there's major issues with the next-gen car. That being said, I think people complaining about tonight's race, probably a little bit over-exaggeration, though I will say the Truck Series race was definitely better for sure. But I do think that the racing product has a lot of hurdles it has to go through, and I think there's a lot of things that do need to change for the racing product to be a lot better, but it's up to NASCAR to make those executive changes if the racing product can get better. Are they going to make it I'm not entirely sure at this moment, but I do think that there had to be some pretty big changes coming if the racing product is going to get better long term. Hopefully it does, but I'm not sure if it's going to get better in the not-so-distant future, and in my honest opinion, because we've seen people like Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, and other people like Kurt Busch and other people in the industry criticize it. I think there's some changes that do need to come for the product to be better. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, obviously, we know Kyle Larson is going to once again be attempting to try to do the Indy 500 and the Coke 600 double. And Kyle Busch earlier this week was asked questions about whether he is interested in once again doing the Indianapolis 500 and the Coke double. Well, Kyle Busch did say that he is actually open to running the Indy 500 and the Coke 600 double. However, he says the phone is not ringing currently at the moment to run it from other teams. And he also says that the last couple of years that he was supposed to drive the Arrow McLaren car in 2024 and 2025. But Kyle Busch also confirmed that Larson has taken that seat. Now, a few years ago, Kyle Busch, in my opinion, would have been absolutely perfect for this, and there was a lot of talk that he was going to go to a couple other teams when he was driving for teams like Joe Gibbs Racing. There had been some talk and conversation about him maybe going to Team Penske back, I believe, in 2017 or 2018 and trying to do the double back then when Kyle Busch, of course, was at his peak. But unfortunately, Kyle Busch did not get the chance and opportunity because Joe Gibbs was not as open of it. Now, obviously, Joe Gibbs has kind of lifted his ban on dirt racing in recent years, but I'm not sure if he's going to allow, especially with things changing in recent years, I'm not entirely sure if he is going to allow a driver now, any of his drivers like a Christopher Bell or Chase Briscoe, to go run the Indianapolis 500. I do think Kyle Busch still running the Indy 500. I think he'd be super, super competitive. I know that Kyle Busch is not as good as he used to be. He's not as strong. Well, one, Kyle Busch is a 40-year-old driver at this point, but historically, when you get to your early 40s, it seems like you become at your peak and you're still at your prime. I think the big issue is the RCR equipment, right? We've talked about this. The RCR equipment is not great, personally. It was good the first half of the year in 2023, but since then it hasn't been great. But I will say there's also been some improvement. But I think if Kyle Busch gets down the road the opportunity to run the Indy 500, I think Richard would definitely be open to doing that. I mean, Robbie Gordon, who drove for Rich Schultz Racing back in the early 2000s, he got the chance to do it in 2002 and also in 2004 as well. I think it would be fun to see Kyle Busch come out and do it. I would love one day down the road to see both Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson compete against each other and maybe be teammates in the Indy 500. I think Kyle Busch is one of the best drivers in the world, even if his issues still to this day. I think it'd be really good for the sport if he got the chance. But I also think that some of these owners now are looking at Kyle Busch's age. A lot of times the driver is, if he was like 2017, he probably would have gotten a call, and I think that people would have accepted him. But Penske's got 3 cars. They're not going to open up a 4th car at this point. He's not going to go to like a Honda team. It's going to be a Chevrolet team, right? It's going to be teams like Arrow McLaren, AJ Foyt Racing, for example. It's not going to be like a Toyota team or a Honda team because he could go to a Honda team perhaps, but I think Chevrolet is going to want him in a Chevy car if he does get the chance. But I would love to see drivers like Kyle Busch go and do it. I would love to see people like a Ross Chastain, a Shane Van Gisbergen. We know that Justin Marks is opening to run the Indy 500. He wants to have a car in the Indy 500 in the future. So I would love to see down the road, maybe if Trackhouse fields a car in the Indy 500, I think Kyle Busch should be one of the first people that they absolutely look at for that potential possibility. I'm going to be very intrigued to see who they decide to get at this point on who maybe gets the chance to run the Indy 500 if a team like Trackhouse opens it up. But I think SVG, of how good he is, he'd be my first choice for that seat. But at the same token, same time, I would love to see Kyle Busch do it. I think it'd be really good for the sport, but it's all going to come down to the business and how they want to do it in the business as well. So we'll see what happens in the near future, and we'll see maybe down the road they change their mind, and maybe someone decides to pick up the phone and someone calls Kyle Busch for it. And there's a lot of teams that are definitely wanting someone like a Kyle Busch to do it. I hope it happens. We'll just have to wait and see if Kyle Busch does maybe down the road get the chance to run the Indy 500 in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lane Riggs. Now, we've already talked about the great finish between Carson Nosbar and Lane Riggs. And originally, Lane Riggs had crossed the finish line in second place in the Craftsman Truck Series event. However, Lane Riggs, like many other drivers have been this year, was disqualified from the Craftsman Truck Series race at Kansas Speedway. After initially crossing the finish line in second place, he now finishes in last and 31st. He will only score 6 points in the event. Now, why was Lane Riggs disqualified during the Craftsman Truck Series event? Well, according to Bob Pockers, it sounds like a bed cover violation. It was an issue on the bed cover, which is something I believe required on the back of the trucks, I'm pretty sure, and is required to be stapled on that truck. If that comes loose, it can give a massive aerodynamic advantage, especially on the spoiler of the truck, and it can definitely make the trucks go a lot faster. That is a major advantage for the teams, and that could be a very major way for a driver to definitely show a lot more speed and get very faster. Now, at this particular moment in point, Farmer Motorsports has not appealed disqualification. There is a chance they could appeal by the time many of you are watching this, but I don't know if because if it's a win. I don't think it's because it's not a win. I don't know if they're going to appeal it personally. I think they might just let it stand. It's tough for Lane Riggs, right? Because Lane Riggs isn't the driver who works on the trucks. He's just the one who gets behind the wheel and drives the truck. So that's unfortunate there because Lane Riggs was in a really good battle, but that finish really doesn't mean anything anymore at this point because that finish is kind of mute at this point because of this penalty for Lane Riggs. We have seen so many disqualifications in 2025. You think about early in the year of Eric Jones. Eric Jones got disqualified in Martinsville for weight being too low on the rear of the car, I'm pretty sure. Parker Kligerman, who had too low weight in the truck, in the rear spoiler. They basically were too low. They appealed it. They lost. Jesse Love and Justin Bonsignor at Rockingham, for example, they got disqualified. Jesse Love, who had originally won the race, he got disqualified. They basically appealed it. They lost their appeals. I think there was some sort of weight issue on the back of the truck. We saw a couple years ago with Denny Hamlin and, of course, Kyle Busch with the issues of the fascia and issues on the front of that fascia of the car. They got disqualified. Chase Elliott won the race. You think about earlier this year and other drivers like Joe Logano, Ryan Preece at Talladega. Too many shims on the back of Ryan Preece's car and Joe Logano because there was a bolt that was loose on the truck, or the car, I should say. But there's been so many, I think a lot of it is because of the fact that these teams are really pushing the gray area and they're pushing these cars and trucks very, very quickly. That's why I think you're seeing so many disqualifications. I think we're very close to breaking a record at this point in regards to disqualifications. I don't think things are going to change going forward. I think you're going to see a lot of teams that are going to continue trying to push it and push the issue and try to get the best out of whatever they're driving and what they're bringing out to the track. Unfortunately, I don't think they're going to appeal it at this point. So I think it's just such a big penalty for the team. It's unfortunate because Lane Riggs is in a really good position. He was up by like 70 or 80 points. But once again, they've lost more points. This 2 weeks in a row now, technically, that Lane Riggs lost a ton of points on the cutoff line. I think he's almost below the cutoff line at this point after that. This does move William Byron up to second. It moves Corey Heim back up to third. I think it moves Tony Breininger inside the top 20 and moves other drivers in much better positions. Top right there for Lane Riggs. But again, unfortunately, rules are rules in this case and in this situation. But I do absolutely feel terrible, and I feel horrible for Lane Riggs because he's not the one who works on the trucks. He's just the one who gets behind the wheel of the cars. It feels terrible for him. But again, at the same time, rules are rules, and it's a terrible situation for Lane, though, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about GMS Racing. Now, there has been a lot of talk and speculation over the course of the last couple of weeks surrounding GMS Racing. So we obviously know there's a lot of talk currently at the moment that Dodge might be coming back to the Craftsman Truck Series in 2026. And one of the teams that's been rumored over the last month or so that might be coming back with the Dodge program is GMS Racing. Now, GMS Racing, of course, has not been in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series since 2023 when they sold their truck operation at the end of the year. They had Grant Enfinger, who nearly won the championship that year, and Raj Groove driving. Raja went over to drive for Spire Motorsports, while Grant Enfinger went over to drive for the number 9 for CR7 Motorsports. A lot of the GMS Racing equipment got auctioned off, I believe, to McAnally Hilgeman Racing for the 2024 year, which led to that team having a lot of success. Now, there was a hauler that was spotted, I believe it was from the NASCAR Nostalgia Cat, I believe Zachary Swartman, I'm pretty sure, on Twitter, putting out the SPS Racing, which they have a major association with Spencer Gallagher, and that is a team, of course, that they have been driving for. Now, I believe that is an old Brett Holmes racing truck, taller, so keep that entirely in mind. Now, according to this, Caleb Vessel actually asked Spencer Gallagher about these rumors circulating about GMS Racing coming back, and Spencer actually kind of addressed these rumors, basically saying that they are unfounded, unsolicited, they're not true. I don't know what you're talking about. And according to what Caleb Vessel said, it sounds like he was smiling and putting out a little smirk about it. He could have just said no comment at this point, didn't have to go fully into detail. When people are having to kind of go this much, this tells me there might be some factual truth to this. Now, like I said, GMS Racing did have a lot of success in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series a few years ago. They've won previous championships back in 2016. They won the championship with Johnny Sauter, and they almost won the championship in 2018 as well with Johnny Sauter, but they've won races with drivers like Alex Bowman, I believe. They've also won with Chase Elliott. They've won with Kyle Larson, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, back in 2016 at Eldora. I'm pretty sure they've also won with other drivers in this series. Not Kyle Busch, who's never driven for them, but they've won with other drivers like Grant Enfinger, and they've had a lot of success over the years as well. And same with Brett Moffitt, who is really good with this program. I would love to see GMS Racing coming back. Now, the big rumor is that GMS Racing is going to come back to trucks, and Spencer Gallagher is going to be the driver. Now, this is no disrespect to Spencer Gallagher, but I've seen him race in ARCA East this year, and I've seen him race in the main ARCA, and I got to be honest, I was not really thrilled to see how he performed. He did not do a very good job behind the wheel of those cars, and I really think if he's the driver that's full-time behind it, I think he would really, really struggle. I personally would think Brett Moffitt would be a really good choice for the program, or someone like a Kyle Weatherman. Those would be two drivers to start off. But this is a big deal because of the Dodge rumors, right? Obviously, Dodge is expected to return to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. There's been a lot of talk. Maybe teams like Nice Motorsports and maybe even Thorsport Racing could be among the organizations that go over to Dodge, considering that Thorsport Racing is in their last year with that contract with Ford currently at the moment. From what I hear, they signed that when Haley Deegan joined their team on a full-time basis for the 2023 year. During the last year of their contract, I think that Thorsport will be one team to watch out for. But if GMS Racing is truly coming back, it'd be certainly interesting. It could lead to potential stuff around Maury Gallagher. I know Maury Gallagher is not really fully affiliated with Legacy Motor Club anymore at this point, but I think it'd be interesting if that could lead to Legacy Motor Club switching, which Legacy could be a potential candidate as well to go to Dodge, because it's not just for the Truck Series program, right, but it's also for the Cup Series stuff, because we have heard rumors as well that Dodge could be in the Cup Series also in 2027. And many people look at Trackhouse Racing, right? There's a lot of talk that Trackhouse Racing may go over to Dodge for the 2027 year, 2028. They don't have the pace and speed with the Chevrolet camp currently at the moment. They're not the top Chevy dog, so why don't stay? That would make no sense to me. But going back to GMS Racing, it'd be really awesome to see this team back in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series again. And I think the fact there's more talk around it, and a lot of that talk is continuing to surge, tells me there's a lot of legs to this and there's a lot of truth. It sounds like from what people like Jordan Bianchi have reported, an announcement is probably coming sometime this summer. We thought we were going to be getting that announcement a little bit earlier this year, but it sounds like right now at this moment it is going to be a little bit later in the year. I do hope we get this announcement soon, though, because we've been talking about it, we've been speculating about it throughout the year. I think the sooner we can get an announcement that is big like this one, the better it's going to be for everybody. But I think it's a big deal to see the team like GMS Racing likely coming back to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. We know they had a ton of success in the sport. I really hope this does happen, because I want to see a team like GMS Racing come back, prove they can have a lot of success. I think it's a big deal for the sport, and I think the fact that more of these rumors continue to circulate tell me it's very likely going to happen. And I love that you got a lot of this talk, right, about all these teams maybe wanting to come back and return. But I really think it's interesting that it sounds like GMS Racing could be potentially making a comeback to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series as early as the 2026 year with the Dodge programs when they do come back next year. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about 2311 Racing from Motorsports and the NASCAR lawsuit. Now, we have not talked a lot about this lawsuit in recent weeks. Obviously, currently 2311 Racing and Farmer Motorsports are suing NASCAR in regards to antitrust claims. But we had a major update this past week on Friday, as on Friday, it was the hearing. The hearing was in regards to the preliminary injunction that was sent out to the teams. This preliminary injunction was granted at the end of last year when Kenneth Bell, who had taken over the case about 2 or 3 weeks prior to the injunction being granted, he took over control of the case and gave a preliminary injunction to Frommer Motorsports and 2311 Racing so they could keep their charters. The reason is because they felt like they were going to be suffering irreparable harm and all their drivers could have been affected. There are many drivers that have contracts where they are required to have a charter. This includes Riley Herbst, This also goes to Tyler Reddick, who could have gone and drove for another team. This affects Bubba Walsh. This affects Noah Gragson. This affects Zane Smith. It affects Todd Gillen as well, and also in some ways affects Corey Heim. So they had this hearing because, of course, NASCAR was appealing it, and of course we knew this hearing was going to be coming. And the hearing went very interestingly. So the judges, with NASCAR, it actually went pretty smooth, and they didn't really ask a lot of questions on the NASCAR side. They were able to say their case, saying that the teams and basically the teams really kind of got their way. They probably shouldn't have gotten their way. They feel like with the case and how everything's kind of gone preliminary injunctions, they feel like the guy handed a pretty easy win there. And then the teams came up, and Jeffrey Kessler, the lawyer for the teams, basically was asked a lot of questions, but really only took about 10 or 15 minutes before the lawyers basically started to go ahead and grill the lawyer. Basically, the guy who's been overseeing it, Paul Niemeyer, who, of course, has been around for a long time in law, he basically said, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't just jump to basic conclusions, say, oh, we're going to go ahead and sue NASCAR, but then, of course, get your preliminary injunction and still race in the sport and get all the benefits of it. That's what he was saying, and I think that is a very fair point. But where I'll disagree with the judge on this is the fact that basically they needed these preliminary injunctions so they wouldn't lose their drivers. And Jeffrey Kessler brought this up at the end of it. He basically said that if they were not granted this preliminary injunction, the drivers at 23XI Racing and Front Row could have all gone ahead and looked for new jobs, and it could have opened up the silly season in a major can of worms. Now, the thing that's interesting for me is what are the judges going to do at this particular point? And judging by how the judges responded to this, I do think there is a chance and possibility that this could end up getting overturned. Which, if it does end up overturned, this could have a couple big effects. There is a potential possibility here that both 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports could lose their charters when this gets done. Now, again, a decision was not made on Friday, and a decision is probably not going to come until probably near the end of the month. That's kind of like it's going to take a few months, or a few weeks, I should say, for things to get done on that front. But I do think there's a very realistic chance and possibility here that they could go ahead and lose, that NASCAR could win their appeal, and the injunction could go ahead and get overruled. Which at that point it would go back to Kenneth Bell, and the Kenneth Bell would have to make another decision because Kenneth Bell felt like there was monopolistic stuff going on in the sport. I'm not sure if the judges feel like there is. Which the judges did say they might actually have a really strong case and a really strong argument. Now the judges also did say that if they wanted to, they probably should go ahead and go to mediation and try to get this done because they feel like that both sides do have major contemplations against each other. And it sounds like Jeffrey Kessler, the lawyer for the teams, he did say they're open to going to mediation and probably having a settlement at this point. Chris Yates, who is the lawyer for NASCAR, said, we're definitely open to going to this mediation, but we're not going to be changing the charter agreement going forward. If, of course, the judge does decide to go ahead and change it and decides to overrule the preliminary injunction, there is a very, again, realistic possibility that 23XI Racing and Front Row could end up losing their charters. It could be really, really bad. Now, I don't think that they're going to skip any races. We're too far into the season at this point. NASCAR would probably take the charters back altogether, and they would lose control of the charters altogether at that point. And 23XI would have to run as an open team, and Front Row would also have to run as an open team as well, which could have a major effect on this silly season because, again, all these drivers are, under contract, and they're required to have charters inside of their agreements for their deals. Now, I don't see Tyler Reddick, which we all talked about this last year, but I don't see a driver like Tyler Reddick leaving the team and going to another team currently at this moment. But a couple years down the road, if they do lose it, we could see two teams out of the sport completely. I think that because, again, this is going to probably go to trial. It sounds like they're not even close to a settlement at this point right now, and it seems like that both parties do have contention against each other. Now, personally, I think the most simple solution is they should be allowed to let 23XI and Front Row keep their charters. But at this point, don't give them the payouts, because right now, 23XI and Front Row, if I'm not mistaken, they're getting all the payout money. I think they should be able to have the guaranteed spots, but maybe you don't give them the money. That'd probably be the most simple solution at this point, because I then think 23XI and Front Row might be a little bit happier. You might not have all parties agree, but then you probably put that in escrow account like Bob Pockers had mentioned. I think that'd be a very interesting way to go about that. I think that could actually be a way to go about this going forward. I think it's going to certainly be interesting what happens with the rest of this lawsuit, because this has been one of the biggest stories we have had in regards to everything over the last couple of months. And I think there's going to be a lot more stuff and a lot more information that is going to come out about this. I just think both have major contentions at this point. And it seems like we're nowhere closer to a resolution on this. And I feel like then a lot of people are going to say, well, the other 13 teams signed it. Well, 13 teams feel like they kind of got put into a really difficult position. I mean, Richard Childress basically called this kind of like I don't remember what exactly he said, but he basically said, oh, communist regime. He called it like a communist regime. So he's not the biggest fan of the decision with the charters. I think that there's going to be a lot of information that's going to come out. It sounds like through this discovery process, which is going on right now, things are not going well for both sides, and I think a lot of interesting stuff is going to happen. I mean, NASCAR is suing on the other side. They're counter-suing the teams right now. I think there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen. It wouldn't surprise or shock me if this goes even to next year at this point. We're just going to have to wait and see, but I think this lawsuit will have some major implications going forward, regardless of who wins the lawsuit. I don't think it's going to be a win for the fans. I think the fans lose in this whole thing, and it's a bad thing for the fans, in my opinion. So that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's get some more of that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What thoughts about 24 Firm potentially losing their charters and losing the injunction? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what thoughts about GMS Racing potentially returning to the Craftsman Truck Series? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If any major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. If not, the next time you're going to see me is tomorrow. We're going to be doing the entry list for the All-Star race, and we're also going to have maybe some other content dropping Tuesday as well. Wednesday, we're going to have a NASCAR news video discussing over the course of the last couple of days, and the Truck Series race picks. And then on Thursday, we're going to have the Cup Series picks for the All-Star race, go through the Open, who I think is going to go in from the Open, and go to the race as well. We got content coming up. Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Cards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Connor Zillish, Junior Motorsports, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Prime KSI, Logan Paul, Donald Trump, Cletus Afron, Matt Benedetto, Frankie Muniz, all the good stuff, and Eric Roswell we talk about on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, buddy.